We'll start off by showing the Easter egg that I was able to find on Moho. This is more of a geographic formation or terrain glitch than it is an anomaly, but it's very interesting and this wouldn't be complete. This video wouldn't be complete if I didn't show it. And this hole right at Moho's North Pole is really easy to find. You can clearly see it from the map. If you have a vehicle in orbit, or if you view it from anywhere in the map, it's really easy to see. You won't have any trouble spotting it. This is what the hole in Moho looks like. It is just a huge cave-like structure. Surprisingly, it's not the deepest point on the map, mainly because this hole is right in the middle of a mountain range, and if you went all the way to the bottom, it would only be about 300 feet above sea level, if I'm not correct, or if I'm not mistaken. Fortunately for Easter egg hunters, the North Pole of Moho is on the way Moho is tilted, the North Pole of Moho is almost perpetually facing the sun, as opposed to the South Pole, which is almost perpetually facing away from the sun. You won't have much trouble finding this Easter egg. It's probably the easiest one to spot from afar off. And now, I'll just do a little base jumping. Probably won't survive, but this was a suicide mission anyway. And here are the map coordinates if you're interested in either walking or driving there, but again, I don't think you'll have any trouble finding this. Moving on to the Evian system. Apparently there are no anomalies known to exist on Eve. However, there is an interesting geographic formation, a four-sided pyramid that is perfectly shaped off of the asteroid moon of Gili. This one, while not difficult to find, can be frustrating due to the amount of time it just takes to get there, even if you know where you're going. This is what it looks like up close. What makes finding this pyramid so frustrating is the time warp. The way time warp works around Gili. Just because it's so small, everything around it moves very slowly if you're caught in an orbit. Anything closer than 5,000 feet, which is close enough in orbit to see the pyramid, You can't do any time warp, so you might find yourself incredibly frustrated looking for this thing, because it might take you several minutes or maybe even an hour, depending on which orbit you use, just to do one rotation. But if there's a trick you can use, and we might do a video detailing specifically how to use it, but if you have something that's grounded on Gilly, you might be able to time warp faster. You see there, since I've got something already landed, I can just time warp as fast as I can, and I don't have to worry about orbits. And you can just use that to align your orbit, because you're going to want to use that trick unless if you're going to want to avoid frustration. So this pyramid is located on this ridge, which is in turn located on this larger bump on the near the equator. Its coordinates are 0, 0. So if you're well, you can't exactly use a rover. I tried using a rover to find this thing, and it just launches itself off. That's how low the gravity is here. So I am pretty much on I'm pretty much at 0, 0 longitude, latitude. This is what it looks like. This is what the surrounding terrain looks like. I could probably show you. There is another pyramid which is not at 0, 0. It looks a whole lot like the one at 0, 0. I call this the pseudo pyramid. Not exactly the same, but it's kind of hard to. It's kind of easy to mix up the two if you're not using the coordinate system. So that's Gilly. Moving on to the Kerbin system, we're going to start off with the Mark I Pod Memorial, which is located right at the Kerbal Space Center. This is probably the easiest Easter egg in the game to find. All you have to do is create a rover and send it to the main part of the Space Center. You won't have any trouble finding it. It's right next to the vehicle construction building. And this is what the Mark I pod looks like. And just in case you need coordinates, here they are. There are 5 monoliths on the planet Kerbin. One of them is really close to the Space Center. These are the coordinates. And these are what the monoliths in Kerbal Space Program look like. Pretty much just they have the squad logo on both ends. This one, like the capsule, is also really easy to find. All you need is a rover or just something that will take you out here. It's on the same plane as the Space Center, and you shouldn't have much trouble finding it. The next monolith on Kerbin that we're going to look at is a bit more tricky to find, mainly because it's a bit camouflaged next to the terrain it's in, and just due to the way it was included, it may be partially or almost entirely obscured by the terrain. It might be underground, depending on what terrain setting you use. This took me a little while to find, but fortunately, since it's against the side of a mountain, you can use some terrain clipping. Use this bug to help you find it. That's how I found it. The third monolith we're going to look at is going to be pretty hard to find, especially if you don't use coordinates. Mainly because this one is obscured. It's partially underground, and that's why it took me so long. You can find it in this crater that's in a mountain system. It's a bit north of the Space Center. And as you can see, it's mostly underground, and that's why it took me so long, and I had to spam this crater with all sorts of probes. But using the coordinate system, I eventually found it. At this point, I would recommend using some sort of jet plane to get a Kerbal here. That way you can recover the Kerbal after you place the flag. I just kept mine here. The third Kerbin monolith that we're going to look at shouldn't be too hard to find. It's on a mountain range that's just southeast of the Space Center. I named it Monolith 1 because it was the first one I could find. And what makes this one easy to find is that it's against a snowy backdrop, and it's just a white backdrop with a black monolith. It's pretty easy to find. Depending on your terrain setting, it might be in the air. The last monolith I'm going to show is west of the Space Center. It's on the other continent, the other major continent on Kerbin. It's nestled right in a sort of crater in a mountain system. And it's right with the inland Space Center. Looks pretty similar to KSP in previous versions. Right next to each other with the fifth monument is the Inland Space Center, which doesn't have a runway or landing site, but it does have its own launch pad and vehicle construction building. It's right in the middle of this K-shaped crater. You want to be careful not to put anything on the launch pad itself, such as any Kerbals, flags, or anything you deem valuable. Because if you place something on there, it will the game will think it's got some debris blocking the launch pad back at the main Space Center. So I placed a flag here when I first found it, and I had to destroy it because it was blocking the launch pad back at the other Space Center. So you're just want to not put anything on there. Close to the Kerbal Space Center is an island runway and airport. This should be easy to spot if you launch any space planes. I've landed many failed spaceplane projects here myself. And inside one of the hangars, you can find some of the retired KSP rocket parts. And this tower is climbable, so if you want to put a Kerbin in there, you can do it. Due south of the Inland Space Center, and due west of the main Space Center, on the opposite continent, is a desert temple. This used to be underground in previous versions, but is above ground as of point 23. This is one of the cooler Easter eggs, and it's possible to explore it even further. There aren't any steps on here, so you're going to have to fly up there if you want to climb up it. Near the North Pole is a crashed UFO. It's not directly on the ice cap, it's more in the tundra area. It's on this jutting peninsula after these 3 bays. Shouldn't be too hard to spot. When flying here, you need to take into account the terrain because it contrasts with the glacier. The land versus the North Pole Glacier itself. You can see it flying above. You can make out the ridges here. This might be another helpful view in relation to the landmass itself. Keep in mind this outline when flying up here, where the grassland ends and the tundra begins. You can see this three humps, 2 humps, whatever you want to call them. Like the hole on Moho, this spot at the North Pole of Kerbin is not so much an Easter egg as it is an interesting geographic formation, and there's a lot of anomalies that happen here. In previous versions, there used to be a perfect pyramid here that formed just as a result of the terrain mapping. That pyramid is gone, however, oh, there it goes. Well, that's a bummer. There we go. Goodbye, jet engine. An interesting anomaly happens when Kerbals try to walk across this North Pole. They tend to flip. Again, not an Easter egg, but it's pretty cool to watch. Might want to be careful because I've had to quick save and reload a few times because Kerbals tend to either get destroyed or fall through. Just a fun place to mess around. Have to admit, not many geographic formations. You're just going to have to go off the nav ball on this one when it starts acting really weird and turning around quickly. the nav ball will point to this point. This is exact north, and the nav ball will point to it as such. And when you start to see it, when you get closer to the North Pole and you see it moving quickly, the nav ball's point of north moving quickly, that's when you know you've passed it. So, the last Easter egg I'm going to show on the planet Kerbin is a sort of smiley face that's at the bottom of the ocean, due south of the Kerbal Space Center. It's hard to see in the map. Actually, it's impossible to see in the map area. You can only see it when zoomed out in the ship view, and the smiley face is so large that as soon as you zoom out, it becomes really hard to see. But you can just make out just the loop of the smiley face. In this shot, I'm sure you could see more of it with other probes, but this is the these are the coordinates, and I'm probably going to show an image of a larger map from a map website. You can see it clearer there, but here you can clearly see the trench that causes the smiley face. So this is another geographic formation that may or may not be a Easter egg, but trying to be complete here. Wouldn't want to leave this out. There are several Easter eggs on the moon, including 3 monoliths. The first one is closer to the North Pole. These are the coordinates. It can be found along this ridge or mountain range or whatever you want to call it, smack dab in the center of one of these craters. It's got the squad logo. This one isn't too hard to find, but it might take some time. Obviously, I recommend using some sort of lander or rover that's very small. You can send up several of these mini landers in one launch, and it's not hard to send them down. The second monolith on the moon is going to be a lot harder to find. It's located near the equator, between 2 small craters located within one larger one. These are the coordinates. What makes this one monolith hard to find is that depending on your terrain quality settings, it may be either underground or mostly obscured. When I first found it, it was almost entirely obscured, and now for some reason it's entirely underground. So you're going to have to do some work with coordinates, or just hope that your graphic settings are the correct ones. Trying to get a clipping error to show you. There it is. You can see it for just a second. It's there. The third Kerbin monolith is going to be a little tricky to find, mainly because there are so many craters near the South Pole where it's located. It's hard to tell which one is the correct one, and from the map view, it's pretty hard to distinguish which one is which. So you might have to use a bit of trial and error, sending multiple probes down here. In relation to this ridge, and well, it's located here on this ridge below or south of these 3 larger craters. This is what it looks like at the bottom of the crater. And you can see as you zoom out, it's got a bit of a clearing at the very bottom, unlike most of the craters surrounding it. You can almost see Kermit the Frog there. That's actually a very good landmark there. The Kermit the Frog, like, crater formation. Or maybe I'm just seeing things. But it's right here. In addition to the 3 monoliths, there are also 3 arches which can be found. These are a lot easier to spot because of their size. They're a lot larger, and their locations are a lot more accessible and not nearly as tricky to find. This one is closer to the equator. You'll be able to spot them from very low orbits or during the descent stage. They're pretty hard to miss. And if you want to send something on top of them, it's going to have to be either a lander probe or a descent stage, because rovers will not be able to climb that thing. You can see it's very hard to miss. The second arch is also equatorial and can be found at the edge of this very large crater. This is the location of the third arch, at the edge of this larger crater. Near the same crater as the third lunar arch is the Neil Armstrong Memorial. And these are the coordinates to the memorial. The last Easter egg on the moon is a crashed flying saucer. One known Easter egg on the moon of Minimus. It is a monolith which isn't too hard to find, mostly because it's a black object against a pale green background, or pale blue, however you want to call it. It's very easy to land extra probes down here. This would be a good place to experiment any lander probes, micro lander probes you would like to test out. The smaller the better, as these things tend to pack a lot of power with them, so just be warned about that. Moving on to Duna, we come to some very interesting Easter eggs. It's not too difficult to land rovers on Duna because of the atmosphere and the possibility to use parachutes. And if you have a general idea of where to go, rovers work very well here on Duna. The first one is a very large face of a Kerbal right smack dab in the middle of this mountain which is in this crater. Honestly, I think this is one of the cooler Easter eggs out here, as it genuinely represents a very curious anomaly. It's pretty easy to spot if you land in the general area. It's not in the exact middle on top of that mountain. It's not here. It's on the side of it. So if you send a rover, it might need to be capable of exploring on an incline. The second Easter egg on Duna can be found a ways off in the same mega canyon as the Kerbal face in Duna. It is a protruding camera from a purportedly buried Curiosity rover. Unfortunately, this Easter egg can't be seen at this time because it is underground as of the 0.23 update. Not only that, this location is pretty hard to find with very few landmarks or places to point out to have a reference. So it's probably not even worth attempting to find right now, unless you're just hoping it's going to be unburied in the future. Its location, according to anomaly map coordinates I've received and looked up, it should be somewhere in between these two rovers. Unfortunately, it's underground, and even using clipping bugs, it's hard for me to see here. So I honestly wouldn't recommend this, but in case you do, there are some larger geographic formations. Take note of these lines that are nearby. In previous versions where the terrain was not as detailed, you could sort of make out a crater here that it was close to the edge of, but that's not easily visible anymore. Another landmark is a type of trench that the camera Easter egg itself is close to bisecting. Another landmark worth pointing out is a type of horseshoe which is seeable from a descent stage or very low orbits. It's not anywhere near the Easter egg itself, but it's worth using to find your bearings when used in conjunction with this trench here. Again, in my opinion, I don't think this Easter egg is worth spending the effort to locate, let alone look at, as it's almost impossible as of right now. This Easter egg is probably the easiest to find on Duna, mainly because it's so large you can probably see it from orbit. It's located near the South Pole, and it is an almost perfect pyramid. In previous versions, it would emit a television signal, which could be converted into an image, but the source of that signal is now very many meters underground, and so you can't hear it now, but the pyramid is still there, and you can see it's very easily identifiable. Very easy to spot on a sunny part of the day. That'll help you spot it from orbit. Unfortunately, the last Easter egg in the Duna system, and the hardest Easter egg to find, has apparently disappeared. This Easter egg is a 100 meter sized object. It's a rock called the Magic Boulder that orbits Ike, Duna's moon, at a height of approximately 15,000 meters. And its orbit would look something like this probe's orbit, but it's not exactly the same. And what makes it so hard is that it's not an object that targeting computers can lock onto. It's pretty much, to find it, you'd have to spot it in the night sky and go after it once you see it. Unfortunately, it's not even there. So even if I was able to show you a location, that would do very little help, and it's not even there, unfortunately. But in case it does show up and gets put back into the game, the way you find it is you pretty much set a probe at either the North or the South Pole, and you spend approximately a couple of minutes at very slow time warp looking for a dot to pass over the sky. Its orbit is about once every 12 minutes, so you won't be waiting for an eternity, but it is very hard to find, and it will require a lot of patience if it's ever put back into the game. In order to see what it looks like, you're going to have to look at videos or pictures taken by people who found it before the more recent updates, as it is no longer in the game. It is very unfortunate, but again, if it wasn't there, it would be the hardest one to find. Skipping Dres because there are no known Easter eggs in that system, we move on to the Jewel system. And there are several Easter eggs on the moons of Jewel. Not all of them. There are some very interesting ones and some ones that are not so interesting. The first one we're going to go to is on Val, and that is a Stonehenge, which is in one of Val's craters. It is one of my favorite Easter eggs in the game, and not too hard to find. Val is a moon-sized celestial body, so sending a rover down here won't be very difficult if you can get it here. There are larger planets besides this one. The larger ones are going to require more work, more delta V, and a lot more effort to figure out a system that works. But Val's is the easiest and the most interesting in my opinion. We move on to the large moon of Tylo, which has 2 of the Easter eggs in this game. But these are honestly not worth the effort, either because they're not visible in point 23 or they're underground. It was not only is it hard to get anything down here because of its size and the amount of delta V needed to get down here safely, but the payoff isn't even that great. This Easter egg is supposed to be Carl Sagan's face, and I've seen videos and pictures from earlier versions where it was very easily identifiable, but now it's not so much. Keep in mind this is on the highest video quality, and from this distance we should easily be able to see it, and we don't. And it's honestly, the amount of effort I spent trying to get a rover here successfully was not worth the disappointment I had in not being able to see Carl Sagan's face. But in case they do fix it, you can find it in close to the middle of this crater. The second Easter egg on Tylo is a cave system which used to be above ground in previous versions, but as of the .23 update, it's underground, so it truly is a cave system, but it's very hard to see, and like the Carl Sagan Easter egg, very underwhelming in the payoff, considering how much effort it takes to get there. The only way you can see this is through a clipping glitch. The location itself is pretty easy to find in the center of this dark spot. But like I said, the only way you can see it is through clipping through. You can see it there. Rather disappointing considering all the effort I took trying to find it. But in case it is ever put above ground, this dark spot is pretty hard to miss. Theoretically, it should be large enough to seen from a very low orbit, so I'm hoping developers fix this one whenever they have the chance. At the end of our Easter egg list, we come to the asteroid moon of Bop, where the final Easter egg is a slain kraken in reference to a removal of a certain bug in the game by the developers. This can be located close to the north pole of Bop. You can see it's clearly dead. This one should be pretty easy to spot from afar off. If you land something in close proximity, you should be able to spot it pretty easily. Speaking from experience, it's pretty fun to have Kerbals jump up and top of this thing in victory, as it would kill so many Kerbals in previous versions of the game.